In the world of country music, names like Johnny Cash, Hank Williams, and Willie Nelson echo through the halls of time. But there's another name, just as great, just as lasting, whose story has been told too little for a voice so big. Marty Robbins. He wasn't just a cowboy. He wasn't just a singer. He wasn't just a racer. He wasn't just a storyteller. He was all of them, at once. Every time he stepped into the spotlight, or behind the wheel of a race car, or in front of a microphone. Born in the Arizona desert and raised on gospel hymns and Western myth, Marty Robbins didn't walk the same path as others. He carved his own. While others stayed in Nashville, he drifted between genres like a tumbleweed in the wind. He sang cowboy ballads that could make a grown man cry. He raced stock cars at 170 miles an hour and nearly died doing it. He topped charts in country, pop, rockabilly, and Hawaiian ballads, and did it all with a smile that never faded. This is the story of a man who lived many lives inside one. A voice that stretched from the American frontier to the Indianapolis Speedway. A heart big enough to hold tragedy, triumph, and timeless love. This is the story of Marty Robbins, and it's one hell of a ride. Martin David Robinson was born on September 26, 1925, in Glendale, Arizona, a small desert town just outside of Phoenix. But the name the world would come to know him by was Marty Robbins. He was one of 10 children, born into a poor but proud family. His father, John, was a ditch digger. His mother, Emma, was a strong, devout woman who held the family together through tough times. They didn't have much, but what they did have was faith, grit, and stories. And it was those stories that shaped young Marty. He grew up surrounded by the legends of the Old West, tales of cowboys, gunfights, and wide-open plains. But he also heard the quiet music of the church, the hymns, the harmonies, the spirit of something greater. At night, he'd sit on the porch and listen to his grandfather, a traveling preacher, spin yarns about Billy the Kid, Jesse James, and the untamed frontier. Those stories didn't just stay in Marty's head, they carved deep grooves in his soul. Later he'd say, "I used to imagine I was riding alongside those cowboys. I was never in Arizona. I was in El Paso or Dodge City or Tombstone. I just lived there, in my head." But life in the Robbins household wasn't romantic. His father drank heavily. The home was turbulent. Money was scarce. By the time Marty was a teenager, his parents had separated. He and his siblings were raised mostly by their mother. Marty struggled in school. He wasn't academic. He was restless, always dreaming, always wandering. He dropped out of high school before graduating. Worked odd jobs, roofing, laying bricks, anything to help the family survive. But deep down, something else was brewing. A desire to be more than the desert could offer. When World War II broke out, Marty enlisted in the United States Navy at just 17 years old. He was stationed in the South Pacific, far from Arizona, far from home, but not far from inspiration. To pass the time, he started playing guitar. He wasn't trained. He didn't read music. He just played, taught himself chords, wrote songs in a spiral notebook, and learned by listening and feeling. He once said, "I'd sit under a palm tree and make up songs about the girl I hadn't met yet." It was during those quiet, lonely nights overseas that Marty Robbins, the songwriter, was born. After the war, he returned home, different, calmer, more focused. He didn't have a college degree, he didn't have money, but he had something no one could take from him, a voice and a dream. When Marty returned from World War II, he didn't go straight into music. He laid bricks, painted signs, tried to settle back into ordinary life. But something had shifted in him. The world he'd seen, the songs he'd written under moonlight in the South Pacific, they wouldn't leave him alone. So he did what dreamers do. He took a risk. Marty started playing in local bars and clubs around Phoenix. Tiny stages, cigarette smoke, rusted microphones. He played covers, some originals, and slowly built a name, not for flash, but for feel. He had a voice that made people stop talking, something smooth, pure, a little country, a little gospel, a little Elvis before Elvis. People didn't just hear Marty Robbins, they felt him. In 1947, he got a chance to perform on KTYL, a small Phoenix radio station. Just a few songs, a short set, but it caught the right ears. Before long, Marty had his own show on KPHO radio called Chuck Wagon Time, where he'd sing live, tell stories, and play requests. That show became a local sensation. Then came TV. He started appearing on Western Caravan, a Phoenix television program that introduced country and Western acts to a growing Arizona audience. He wasn't famous yet, but he was rising. And in 1951, he got the call that changed everything. Little Jimmy Dickens, a Grand Ole Opry star, heard one of Marty's early recordings while touring through Arizona. He was so impressed, he passed it on to a talent scout at Columbia Records. They liked what they heard. Later that year, Marty Robbins signed with Columbia, a label that would become his home for the next 3 decades. That contract didn't just launch his career, it launched a musical era. Marty's early singles didn't explode right away. Songs like Love Me or Leave Me Alone and I'll Go On Alone showed promise, but didn't dominate the charts. Until 1953. That's when I'll Go On Alone hit #1 on the Billboard Country chart. Marty Robbins, the desert kid, the war vet, the radio local, was now a national country star. He didn't stop. Singing the Blues, 1956. #1, A White Sport Coat and a Pink Carnation, 1957. Crossover pop hit The Story of My Life. Another chart climber. He wasn't just country. He was charting in pop, even in the UK, and Nashville took notice. In 1953, Marty was invited to perform at the Grand Ole Opry, the crown jewel of country music. He stepped on that legendary stage with a grin and a guitar, and he brought the house down. He didn't dress flashy. He didn't talk big. He just sang with heart, with depth, with something real. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. He was invited back, and then again, and again. By 1955, he was a full Opry member. From honky-tonks in Arizona to the House of Legends, Marty Robbins had arrived. By the late 1950s, Marty Robbins had hits. He had Opry respect. He had country fans. But he didn't have a legacy yet. That would change with one pink album cover and one story about a jealous cowboy in El Paso. In 1959, Marty released an album that no one saw coming, Gunfighter Ballads and Trail Songs, a throwback to the dusty tales his grandfather used to tell. This wasn't honky-tonk heartbreak or pop country sugar. This was cinematic storytelling, set to haunting melodies, galloping rhythms, and voices echoing across the plains. It was cowboy music, but elevated, and it opened with one of the most legendary tracks in country music history, El Paso. A Western tragedy in 3 verses wasn't a love song, it was a story. A tale of a cowboy who falls in love with a woman named Felina in Rosa's cantina, gets jealous, kills a rival, flees town, then returns for love, and dies in her arms. It was 4 minutes and 40 seconds long, unheard of for radio hits at the time. Most songs were 2 minutes tops, but Marty Robbins didn't care. He believed in the story, and so did the public. El Paso hit #1 on both the country and pop charts in 1960. It won a Grammy Award for Best Country and Western Recording, and it turned Marty Robbins into a household name. Radio DJs who were told the song was too long, they played it anyway. Because once you heard that first guitar line, you had to know how it ended. The full album was just as powerful. Tracks like Big Iron, The Tale of an Arizona Ranger, Cool Water, Billy the Kid, The Master's Call. These weren't just country songs. They were American myths told through the mouth of a singer who never forgot what it meant to dream in the desert. Marty used minimal instruments, often just guitar, bass, and sparse backing vocals, to create an atmosphere that felt wide, lonely, and cinematic. It didn't sound like anything else on the radio, and yet it sold millions. The success of Gunfighter Ballads and Trail Songs was instant and long-lasting. The album stayed on the Billboard 200 chart for over a year. It became a staple in country households, but also drew in fans from folk, rock, and even classical circles. Bob Dylan later said Marty's narrative style influenced his own songwriting. Johnny Cash called Marty's storytelling pure and perfect. Even heavy metal bands in later decades would cite Big Iron as one of the greatest story songs ever written. Marty did what no one else had done. He took the imaginary Old West and gave it a voice people could cry to. El Paso wasn't a gimmick. It was a tragedy. It had character, it had flaws, it had soul. You didn't just hear it, you saw it. And that's what made Marty Robbins more than a country singer. He became a folk hero. Marty Robbins may have sung about cowboys, but off the stage, he was chasing something else entirely. Speed. Not metaphorical speed. Real, rubber-burning, engine roaring, NASCAR track kind of speed. Because when the curtain closed and the crowd went home, Marty didn't go back to his hotel. He went to the garage. He changed out of his rhinestones and into a fireproof racing suit. Marty's love for cars started young. Back in Glendale, Arizona, he'd fix up old junkers just to make them run. He was fascinated by machines, not just how they moved, but how they felt when they pushed you to the edge. But it wasn't until the 1960s, when he had a little money and fame under his belt, that he finally got behind the wheel for real. His first races were in local stock car circuits in Tennessee and Georgia. Amateur, but intense. And soon after, he was racing with the NASCAR Grand National Series, today's equivalent of the Cup Series. That's right, the same man who sang El Paso and Don't Worry was out there, doing 190 miles per hour at Talladega. No gimmick. He was fast. At first, people thought it was a publicity stunt, a country star playing race car driver, until he started passing real competitors. He wasn't out there just for the fun. He was competitive, damn competitive. He raced in over 30 NASCAR Cup Series events between 1966 and 1982. His best finish? 5th place at the 1974 Motor State 360 in Michigan. He did it with his own car, his own team, and his own hands on the wheel. Even NASCAR legends like Richard Petty and Dale Earnhardt Sr. respected him. Not as a musician, as a driver. In the 1974 Charlotte 500, Marty's passion nearly killed him. At over 160 miles per hour, he smashed into a wall, head-on. The impact shattered his face, broke bones, required plastic surgery, and nearly ended his life. But Marty didn't quit. Once he healed, he got back in the car. Not because it was safe, not because he needed the money, but because it was his second love. He once said, "I drive because I love it. I race because it makes me feel alive. Music is what I do. Racing is who I am." Marty never won a NASCAR Cup race, but he won respect. And in a sport where fans are hard to win over, that's everything. He built friendships in the pits, slept in trailers at the track, funded his own crew out of his music earnings. He didn't ask for special treatment. He earned his way, lap after lap. To this day, NASCAR old-school fans still mention him with pride. He even had a NASCAR car painted in his honor at tribute races years later. Because no matter how many hits he sold, Marty Robbins was also one of them. Most singers spend their entire careers trying to master one sound. But Marty Robbins, he didn't believe in limits. He was country, yes, but also pop, gospel, rockabilly, Hawaiian, and even Latin-inspired at times. He wasn't a genre, he was a voice. And that voice didn't belong to any one radio station. In 1957, just as Elvis was shaking his hips into stardom, Marty released a song that would become a crossover smash, A White Sport Coat and a Pink Carnation. It wasn't a cowboy song, it was a bittersweet ballad about rejection at a school dance, delivered with a smoothness that could compete with Sinatra. The track hit number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, sold over 1 million copies, and proved something major. Marty could hang with the pop crowd and beat them at their own game. He didn't abandon country, but he didn't let it fence him in either. A lot of people don't know this, but Marty had a deep love for Hawaiian music. He even recorded entire albums with steel guitar, ukuleles, and soft island rhythms. Tracks like Beyond the Reef, Kalu'e, The Hanging Tree, with cinematic Polynesian instrumentation. These weren't novelty songs. They were authentic, full of care and nuance. To Marty, the beauty of Hawaiian music wasn't just in the melody. It was in the emotion. He once said, "If a song can take you somewhere else, it's worth singing." Marty's roots were grounded in faith. His mother, Emma, raised her children in the Church of Christ, where harmonies were sacred and sincerity mattered more than showmanship. Throughout his career, he recorded dozens of gospel tracks, including The Master's Call, a fire and brimstone cowboy's conversion story, Lord, You Gave Me a Mountain, one of his most gut-wrenching ballads, I Can't Quit, I've Gone Too Far, these songs didn't chart as high. But for fans who loved Marty's heart, they meant everything. Because when he sang about heaven, you believed he'd seen it. Even as country purists clung to twang and tradition, Marty dipped into early rock with swagger. Singing the blues, part rock, part honky-tonk, all classic, that's all right. Elvis-like energy, tight guitars, teenager's dad, a response to the rock and roll generation gap. He didn't try to copy the rockers. He just used their tools and made something different. Marty Robbins could jump from a gunfighter ballad to a pop hit, to a gospel hymn, to a smooth Hawaiian waltz, without ever losing his identity, because his voice had something rare: honesty. You never felt like he was faking it. Even when he was wearing different musical costumes, his soul stayed the same. Marty Robbins didn't need to shout to be seen. He wasn't loud like Johnny Cash. He wasn't rowdy like Waylon Jennings. He didn't flip tables or make headlines for scandals. But when Marty entered a room, people noticed. There was a calmness to him, a cool confidence, the kind of presence that made people lean in rather than step back. It wasn't just his voice that won over millions. It was his personality. A blend of charm, humility, and humor that felt as natural as a desert sunrise. In the 1960s, country stars were finally breaking into mainstream television. And Marty? He jumped in with grace. From 1969 to 1971, he hosted The Marty Robbins Show, a syndicated variety program that mixed live performances, sketch comedy interviews, classic country storytelling. He'd perform solo, bring on special guests, crack jokes in between songs, and give fans a full glimpse of the man behind the music. It wasn't flashy. It was warm, real. The show aired mostly in southern and midwestern markets, but fans tuned in from all over the country. And most importantly, Marty loved doing it. His face didn't just belong on album covers, it belonged on film reels too. Marty appeared in a handful of movies, mostly westerns, naturally, like The Badge of Marshall Brennan, 1957, Buffalo Gun, 1961, Raiders of Old California, 1957. He never pursued acting with the same ambition as music, but when he showed up on screen, he looked like he belonged. He wasn't pretending to be a cowboy. He was one, at least in spirit. He also popped up regularly on other artists' TV shows. The Johnny Cash Show, Hee Haw, The Ed Sullivan Show, The Tonight Show, with Johnny Carson. And each time, he delivered a smile, a story, and a voice that melted the room. Fans loved Marty's singing, but his band and crew loved his kindness. He was never the diva. He traveled light, didn't need red carpets or demands. He'd sit on the bus like everyone else, crack jokes, and play cards. On stage, between songs, he often told dry jokes, the kind that made people chuckle and shake their heads. He didn't try to dominate the spotlight. He shared it. If another artist had a new song, he'd give them the mic. If a fan wanted a picture, he'd smile, even if he was late to sound check. Despite his fame, Marty was surprisingly private. He rarely spoke to the press about his personal struggles. He kept his family close. He never played the tabloid game. In a business full of noise, he protected his silence. He once said, "I sing about cowboys, but I live for my kids. Fame ain't everything. Family's everything." That quiet dignity earned him respect across all genres, not just from country stars, but from pop icons, folk singers, race car drivers, even pastors. Because Marty didn't have to prove he was real, he just was. By the late 1970s, Marty Robbins had lived more than most men ever dream of. He'd topped the charts, driven in NASCAR, toured the world, raised a family, written songs that would outlive him. But time doesn't stop for legends. Years of relentless touring, racing, and pushing himself had taken a toll. Marty began suffering from heart problems, the same thing that had plagued his father. In 1969, at just 44 years old, he suffered his first heart attack. It was serious. Doctors warned him to slow down. He didn't. In 1982, after years of pushing through chest pains and fatigue, he underwent quadruple bypass surgery. He bounced back, briefly. In true Marty fashion, he returned to the stage one last time, grinning like a kid, thanking his fans and singing as if nothing was wrong. But on December 8, 1982, just 1 week after that final surgery, Marty Robbins died. He was 57 years old. The news rippled across the country like a thunderclap. From Nashville to Phoenix, radio DJs dropped their playlists. Fans lit candles. The Opry dimmed its lights. And somewhere, in Rosa's cantina, Felina cried again. They buried him in Brentwood, Tennessee, beneath the same sky he used to race under. Cowboys wept. Country singers held each other. Even race car drivers showed up in suits, not fire suits, to say goodbye to one of their own. The flag of Arizona was draped over his casket. A lone guitar leaned beside his grave. And though he was gone, Marty Robbins had already done the one thing every artist dreams of. He made time stand still. In 1982, just weeks before his death, Marty was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. He received the call while recovering in the hospital. He smiled and said, "I reckon I've done all right." He was also posthumously honored by the NASCAR community with a tribute lap at Talladega, the Academy of Country Music, for Lifetime Achievement fans who kept playing his records until the vinyl wore thin even decades later. Marty Robbins is everywhere, if you know where to listen. Big Iron blew up again in the 2010s thanks to internet memes and video games like Fallout. New Vegas. His face appears on vintage country compilations. Young artists like Sturgill Simpson, Colter Wall, and Orville Peck cite him as an influence. His storytelling model still shapes modern songwriting. He didn't scream to be remembered. He whispered, and it echoed. He taught us that you don't have to pick one dream. You can be a cowboy, a racer, a lover, a father, a storyteller, a singer. You can live wide and die full. You can turn a desert boyhood into gold records and racetracks. You can sing about pain without becoming bitter. You can sing about love without sounding fake. And you can make strangers cry with nothing but a voice, a guitar, and a well-told story. Marty Robbins didn't just sing songs. He painted worlds. He gave us Rosa's Cantina. He gave us Felina. He gave us Cool Water, The Big Iron, The Master's Call. But most of all, he gave us a reason to believe in beauty, even when life gets hard. And that is why he'll never truly be gone. Because as long as there's a lonesome road, a fading sunset, a heart that hurts but still hopes, Marty Robbins will ride on forever.